Well, welcome everybody. This is Tony Karras, and I'm going to do a short demo of the migration wizard for migrating SMG on Ubuntu over to the new SMG on SLES Appliance. Okay, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to be using these two servers, 180 and 190, or at least that's the IP address they start out with. 180 is the SMG on Ubuntu server, and 190 is the new SMG on SLES Appliance. I'm going to start both of these up. Okay, so this is SMG on Ubuntu, and it's the latest update, and so you'll see something that you've never seen before in this user interface. If you go into Manage Servers and you expand this, you'll see this section, Prepare for Replacement. But you'll notice that the comment here says that the only time this is enabled is if it's on the local server of the node that's being replaced, and the replacement process has been initiated on the SMG on SLES Appliance. Okay, I'm pointing that out now because now we're going to go to the SMG on SLES Appliance. I'll close this. I'll close the administration console for SMG on Ubuntu, and now we'll start up on the SMG on SLES administration console. As I pointed out, that's on IP address 190. So this is a brand new SMG on SLES appliance. And in fact, the appliance has been installed, the IP address and those basic settings have already been put in, but other than that, nothing else has been done on this. Now, we'll prompt for these things along the way, but there's two things that I'd like to take care of now. In order for you to migrate, that is, in order for you to replace an SMG on Ubuntu appliance with the new SMG on SLES appliance, the migration process is going to require that SSH be enabled on the SMG on SLES appliance. It doesn't have to be enabled long term, but it has to be enabled for the migration to take place. And to make this easier, I'm also going to enable it right now to start automatically when it starts up. But for security reasons, you'll probably want to turn that off at a later date. Okay. The other thing is, in order for the SMG on Ubuntu to SMG on SLES migration to work, if there are databases on the SMG on Ubuntu node that you're trying to replace, then you also have to configure the Postgres server on the SMG on SLES server to be able to accept a connection from that SMG on Ubuntu server. So in order to do that, I come in here and I tell it I want to allow communication from the IP address of 180. Okay. If I save that, that's now enabling Postgres to listen to connections from that IP address. Okay, now we can begin the SMG or the wizard. So as you see, this is a brand new installation, and this is the migration that I want to run. Replace an existing secure messaging gateway server. This is the information we need. We need the name of the server or the node that we're trying to replace. In my case, well, I'll point this out. On 180 again, we'll see the name of it. We've only got one node in this SMG on Ubuntu network, so this is obviously the name of the server that I want to replace, smgu.taz.com. So I specify that here. And then, so this top section is the name of the SMG on Ubuntu server you're going to replace. And if it contains databases, it has to have the Postgres or the name of the Postgres user and the Postgres user's password on that server. Now, if you're in a multi-node environment, this might contain, say, the quarantine databases or stats or something but in a single node environment, the node that you're replacing usually contains the configuration database as well. This bottom section is just about the configuration database. But because I'm in a single node environment, that means it's also on that server. So I have to specify the IP address and port if the port is not on the default port of 5432. But because this is on the default port, I can specify that. Now, when you click on the validate step, we check these parameters. We look up the server, we try and connect to, or we have to connect to the configuration database. Oh, okay. This is another thing that has to be enabled. Now, in order for, because this is a single SMG on Ubuntu server, by default, we usually run with the Postgres database on that server configured to only allow connections from the local host. Well, that's not going to be sufficient because I'm on a different server now and I want to talk to the database, the configuration database on 180. So I have got to enable access on server 180 in Postgres to allow connections. Okay. Now I've made this a little bit simpler because I created a script to allow you to do this. It's in opt guava assets bin Linux scripts. And it's called pgenableaccess.sh. Now you have to run it as an administrator because we are changing the configuration of the Postgres service. And all of the parameters that are taken by this script is the IP address of the server that you want to allow access, to be able to access this Postgres server. I'm putting in the 190 address, which is the address of my SMG on SLES server. Okay. Now it set the IP, it enabled the IP address, and then it restarts the Postgres service in order for that access to be allowed. Okay. So it failed the validation. I hit the back arrow and came back to change the configuration, and I'll try it again. This time it was able to successfully connect to the configuration database and read the information that it needed. Okay, so now, if you read the comments here, the next step is in the SMG on Ubuntu server, the node that we are trying to replace. So if we click on this link, it'll take us to that administration console. And it tells you to go to the system management, manage servers, to the node. And as you see, now the prepare button is enabled. And this is where the heart of the migration work or the preparation of the migration work takes place. When you click on this button, we will generate a number of scripts that are needed in order to perform the migration. And then we'll kind of combine the calling of those scripts into one script. So the migration step, the required step is only running one script. Okay, so I hit prepare and it's successful. And as it tells you here, there's actually two things. It detected that on this node that we're about to replace, it contains quarantine MIME files, and possibly also, well, it also contains the relay queues. Now, those operations can't be completed by the replacement server unless it has those files. Now, quarantine will run just fine without the existing files, but the problem is users in their quarantine won't be able to release or forward or view those messages in their quarantine. They'll still be able to delete them, or they'll still be able to look up the subject and things like that, the things that are contained in the database, but they won't be able to examine the message itself until those message files exist on the replacement server. Now that's considered an optional step. So the required step above is to just go to the file server console on the Ubuntu server, change to this directory, and then execute this script as root. So you sudo and execute that script. What this script will do is, because it detected there are databases on that server, it will perform the function of backing up the database and restoring it to the new SMG on SLES Appliance. Then it will also copy all of the critical files from that SMG on Ubuntu server over to the SMG on SLES server. And that's the end, and set the proper permissions. And that's all that's required in order to replace the SMG on Ubuntu server with this new appliance. So we're going to perform the required steps right now. Okay, if I go to the console on the SMG on Ubuntu server and I change to that directory, opt guava replace, you'll see that there's a number of scripts that were created there. But the only one that's required is the .replace server.sh, and it will call the other scripts that it needs to. So I sudo .replace server.sh. Now, after I hit return, first it's going to tell me that I might need to accept the fingerprint key for the SMG on SLES server. So I will. And now it's prompting me for the root password on the SMG on SLES server. And it's going to prompt me for this several times, because many of the operations that we have to perform have to be performed as root. Okay. So first thing, I neglected this to show you this. During the install process, when it began copying the files, it switched from waiting to install to the installation is in progress. Okay, it finished backing up and restoring the databases already. Now it's trying to copy DKIM files. It's waiting for the root password. That copy succeeded. Now it's waiting for the root password in order to set properties on those files. That's copying security files, setting the proper ownership on those files. And I mistyped the password, so it'll prompt again. Setting the ownership on those files as well, or the security files. And then it's copying the results to the replacement server. Okay. So the SMG on SLES server has now detected that the required steps have been completed, and so you'll see this screen. Now on the SMG on SLES or Ubuntu appliance, you'll see that because the steps have been completed, it's now saying press space, and it's going to change the IP address of the SMG on Ubuntu server to the IP address of the SMG on SLES server. And the reason we do this is because that SMG on Ubuntu server has just been updated, or has just been replaced, and so now we need to shut it down. Okay. Now, as you see, the last step that's required on SMG, on the new SMG on SLES server, is the replacement has now taken place. So we want to read or change its IP address to the original IP address of the SMG on Ubuntu server. So we go back to the administration console, select the network gadget. This gadget's always a little slow coming up. So like I say, after we change the IP address of the SMG on SLES server, now to the original IP address of the SMG on Ubuntu server. Click OK, and it's going to save those network settings. Okay. Because I just changed the IP address, my URL is no longer correct. I need to change that to the original IP address of 180. As soon as the configuration is successful and it's changed the IP address, then I'll be able to connect to the administration console at the new address again. Okay. The last step is to reboot this server And when it comes up, it will be at the 180 address, and SMG on SLES will now be running, and that server will have completely replaced the SMG on Ubuntu server. Okay, the reboot's going to take us a few seconds. And in preparation for this, I'm going to restart the SMG on Ubuntu server. But remember, it's now at a new IP address. It's now at 190. Okay, so the SMG on SLES server is now at 180. If we log in here, you'll see that now it's run. The SMG service is now running here. Okay, in fact, the service is running and is scanning mail already, because now that it's woke up at the IP address 180, the MX records didn't need to change or anything else. It's now running just as SMG, the SMG on SLES Appliance, and it's now scanning mail. Now, as I said, the quarantine, the files that were out there, you wouldn't be able to access them yet. So we're going to complete the optional step of copying over those files. And in order to do that, I just need to open up a console to the original SMG on Ubuntu server, which now is at IP address 190. Go back to that opt guava replace directory and execute the copy file script as root. So, because the IP address changed, I have to accept the fingerprint again. Now it's asking for the root password on SMG on SLES again. Set the initial permissions for the directory it created. It's about to copy the files, the quarantine files. I didn't have a lot of files out there. There were probably 150 or 200. Now it's got to update permissions on those directories that got created. Now it's going to copy the relay queue files. Oops, mistyped the password again. So it prompts again. Okay, so everything's been copied. Now, well, even before I could have showed you this, I can go into the quarantine. Into the quarantine, the messages exist. In fact, oh, so these are the ones I just sent today, but let's look at the ones that were even there from before. I'll go to the oldest ones. And I can click on the messages and the quarantine's up and running.